The hardest difficulty of Diablo 2 is called Hell, and for good reasons. Enemies are higher level, have more health and damage, and are more resistant to your attacks. If your character is not ready, you're going to have a bad time, but at this point you should come prepared, having gained lots of levels and good gear from beating the game on both normal and nightmare difficulty before you can even try. But what if you started a brand new level 1 character directly in the final difficulty? Can you beat the game this way? Can you even make it past the very beginning of Act 1? I was honestly doubtful, but I like a good challenge, so I decided to do exactly that. I wasn't sure what class would be the best, but I figured I needed the range advantage, so I picked the Amazon first. And just to demonstrate why, here's what happened when I tried to take on a hell difficulty monster in melee combat. Yeah, instantly one-shot as soon as they landed their first attack. So I tried keeping my distance and threw javelins at a fallen instead, but that highlights my next problem. Due to the massive level difference, I only had a 5% chance to hit with every throw, the lowest your chance to hit can go. And with my low damage against their massive life pool, there was just no way that I would be able to out-damage their life regeneration even with an inventory full of javelins and all the patience in the world. And it turned out that out-damaging monster region would be a huge roadblock for this challenge. But I had a few other ideas in mind. In previous challenges I have made use of the randomly spawning shrines. There are several of them, but I was looking for a few specific ones. And at this point I also swapped to the paladin, because I figured if the starting weapon wasn't going to matter, he would have a better chance of success thanks to having better frame data for attacks with most weapons, as well as having really good early game skills if I would happen to make it past level 1. The shrines are somewhat rare to find, so it took a few resets, but soon enough I found the first one, the Poison Shrine. The Poison Shrine gives you some throwing potions that you can't use at level 1, but it also spreads a poisonous cloud around it upon activation, and that can poison enemies. And while it did work, as in it did poison enemies, it didn't seem like the damage from this scales with difficulty, and it barely scratched the fallen I had lured into the trap. There's also an Exploding Shrine, which is similar, but it deals physical and fire damage in an explosion instead. And I was pretty sure that this was also not going to work if the Poison Shrine didn't, but I tried it anyway. And no, it unfortunately did not work. And I tried it again against a non-fire immune enemy just to be sure, but still no luck. There's also another shrine called the Fire Shrine, and I knew before even testing this that all it does is bring everyone down to 50% life, but I had to try anyway. And while it did by far the most damage from what I've tried so far, the monsters started regenerating their life right away, so while taking away 50% of their health bar was of course good, it didn't really bring me that much closer to being able to fully defeat one. Having no luck with the shrines, I went back to the drawing board. At the exit from the Bloodmoor to the Cold Plains, there's an immortal NPC called Flavy that attacks enemies that get close to her. But unfortunately, I know from previous challenge runs that you don't get any experience from enemies that she kills. Besides, despite her impressive accuracy, it doesn't look like her damage scales with difficulty either, so I don't think she would have been able to kill anything in hell anyway. But I do appreciate the relentless effort in trying to keep the rogue encampment safe from evil. Inspired by Flavy's accuracy, I also tried the Sorceress, since she has a level 1 Firebolt skill from her starter staff. The advantage being that spells don't use your chance to hit, meaning I would deal damage with every attack as long as the projectile hit the enemy. I had to pick another enemy since the Fallen are fire immune, but even when constantly hitting Firebolts, I couldn't get their health bar to move at all. Monsters' life regeneration were just too high. I also tried buying a staff with other spells on them to see if I could kill a Fallen, but even when constantly slowed from the cold damage, I couldn't get enough damage in while having to run away all the time. But then I started thinking, what if I could stop monsters' life regeneration? The only thing I could think of that's available at level 1 was poison damage. As long as enemies are poisoned, their life regeneration completely stops. But to get any of that without having any skill points, I needed to get some loot, so I increased the player setting of the game to the max to get more drops, and then started running around opening chests while doing my best to dodge enemies as best as I could. And in worst case I at least collected a big pile of gold from selling the loot that I found while thinking of new ideas, because since I was in hell I got hell level loot, which meant that the majority of the loot I found was too high level for me, but at least the gold was building up fast. And luckily my friend Geed was there to sort me out, for a price of course. And since both gambling and trading at vendors is based on your character's level, I was able to convert my gold to low level items. Now on the other hand, level 1 items are kind of crappy, but that's another issue, at least I had a way of grinding for some gear. In addition to opening chests, I also started looking for shrines again, hoping for some chipped gems, because while I found lots of gems from the chests, they were mostly higher level, and the chipped quality was the only one I could use at level 1. And I continued the routine of opening chests and looking for shrines in the Bloodmoor, selling the loot and gambling, and after a few hours I was fully geared using the following. Rare gloves with 1 strength, 1 dexterity and some attack rating, a rare belt with some minor, not too important stats, rare boots with more stats and some minor resistances, a ring with 1 max damage and some stamina, another ring with 1 dexterity, an amulet with 2 dexterity, and finally a body armor and a helm with 2 open sockets each. not very impressive, and certainly not enough to make a difference in health, but any stats were better than no stats, and the dexterity was really important. Let me explain by taking a look in my stash. I really wanted to use a hunter's bow because it's the fastest bow available at level 1. The problem is that the paladin lacks 8 dexterity on level 1 to equip it. But with all the dexterity from my gear and putting my last emerald in my helm, I had just enough to equip a hunter's bow. So for my weapon of choice, I had two options. First, I could buy a hunter's bow with 3 open sockets from a vendor and put some gems in it, which you can still buy from vendors even in hell if you're low enough level. My other option was this rare that I gambled from Geed, and this was the one I decided to go with, and there were mainly 2 reasons for that. While a bow with chipped gems would deal more damage, a chipped emerald deals 10 poison damage over 3 seconds, while the rare dealt poison damage over 4 seconds. It was going to take a lot of hits to take an enemy down either way, and the longer poison duration would stop the regen for longer. And the second reason was that I had been a bit unlucky with my chipped gem drops, only finding a single chipped emerald that I needed in my helm to be able to wear the bow to begin with. I then filled out the rest of my sockets with 2 chipped diamonds for some more attack rating and 1 chipped ruby for some life. Though, doing some quick napkin math after the fact, I don't think the attack rating mattered at all, since my chance to hit was 5% only because it doesn't go any lower. Increasing my attack rating with so little at this level actually didn't increase my chance to hit. I filled my inventory with as many arrows as I could carry and went back to the Bloodmoor for another attempt at taking on hell difficulty at level 1. I ran out of stamina before I could land even 1 hit, and then remembered that I should probably buy some stamina potions before attempting this. With my stamina problem solved, I tried again and I landed 2 hits not too long after each other, and I was finally able to put a real dent into the Fallen's health bar. But unfortunately, I was not able to push that advantage further because I started missing. The unlucky streaks I could get with just 5% chance to hit were brutal, quickly erasing any damage I managed to do. While I didn't really come close to defeating the Fallen, it did give me a hint of something else to try. I was spending about a third of the fight running away from it, meaning a lot less arrows fired compared to if I could just shoot continuously. So if I could find a target who moved slower or maybe was stuck somewhere, I could keep firing my bow for more shots and more chances to keep them poisoned. I started by trying my luck against a zombie in the Bloodmoor, but while they're slower, once they latch onto you, they're not that much slower, and additionally, they also have way more life than a Fallen and also 75% poison resistance. I even found a fire shrine next to a zombie to support me, but even with a 50% head start, it wasn't long before the zombie had regenerated back all of its life again. So far I had been completely ignoring quill rats because of the ranged attack, but they do have about the same life as a Fallen, and no poison resistance at all, even in hell, and maybe dancing between their shots could be more efficient than running away. It took some time to isolate one since they're not as keen to following you to a secluded corner of the map, but I eventually managed to create a fair 1 versus 1 duel. But the quill rats were a bit weird. After the first hit I got hopeful since it looked like more damage than I had done against the zombie or even the Fallen. But once they fired back at me, they did so very quickly, so I didn't have time to shoot in between dodging. They did lose interest in me quite quickly though for some reason, but once they did, they started walking around very randomly, which led me to miss a lot of arrows. But despite the quill rat attempt not being successful by any metric, it somehow filled me with a little bit of hope, so I moved past the Bloodmoor into the Cold Plains, looking for any opportunity that presented itself. And as it happened, I stumbled upon something potentially great. In the Cold Plains there were Dark Hunters, which were quite fast, pretty much exactly as fast as I was when running. I got a few very persistent ones on my tail, and trying to get rid of them I got chased into the burial grounds. And luck was finally on my side because 2 of them got randomly trapped in a corner behind a fence, and for some reason they just got stuck there instead of going around. This was truly a happy accident because I would not have thought of this on my own. I took 2 full laps around the burial grounds, but eventually I lost all other pursuers, and suddenly I'd stumbled into a situation with a trapped enemy who just stood there. If I ever had a chance of wearing one down, this was it. But it wasn't enough. Even with a 4-second poison duration, the fastest bow I could get at this point, and being able to attack completely uninterrupted, I just couldn't outdamage their health regeneration. But Dark Stalkers have a lot more life than a regular Fallen, and unless I'm mistaken, monster regeneration is based on their max life. So I snuck back out of the burial grounds carefully and tried to lure a single Fallen with me into the corner. Herding monsters around like this in hell was very risky, and the smallest mistake could kill me or mess up my trap. But I channeled every bit of patience that I had, and anytime something didn't go as planned, I took another lap around the entire burial grounds and tried again. Eventually I got the Fallen to where I wanted him to go, together with the 2 Stalkers. At first the Fallen seemed to be much more erratic in its movements than the Stalkers, and I missed a lot of arrows. But then for some reason he just stopped completely, and I could just stand there and fling arrows at him. And it felt so close. Several times I got a lucky streak of hits, and dealt a significant amount of damage to it. But with every hit dealing so little damage, I just couldn't string together a streak of hits long enough. But just the fact that I did better than before gave me this extremely strong feeling that this was possible. It had to be possible. There was just no way that I was going to give up now. But the question was just, how would I proceed from here? My first idea was that I could stack up full of arrows, that is 10 quivers in my inventory and when equipped, giving me 5,500 arrows in total, and then tape my mouse button down and leave my computer for a while, and hope that somewhere in those 5,500 attacks I would get an extraordinary streak of lucky hits and kill the fallen. I do realize that that sounds absolutely crazy, but at this point I was 100% ready for crazy. The only other way I could think of to increase my damage was to use charms with elemental damage, but then again finding a level 1 charm in Hell was super rare and I had yet to find a single damage charm that I could use. I spent the next hour researching different options on wiki pages and on forums, and one thing that I learned was that there was actually a significant difference between the Paladin and the Amazon when it comes to how fast they attack with a hunter's bow. The Amazon attacks at 12 frames per attack, or about 2 attacks per second, with the Paladin sitting at 14 frames per attack, or around 1.8 attacks per second. That might not sound like that much, but if I was going to fire potentially thousands of arrows, it could definitely make a difference. And I was going to need every advantage I could get, so I started over completely, again, with the Amazon. That meant a lot of extra grinding, but as the old Horaric saying goes, there's no grind to... the grind is the... Let's just get on with it. I'll spare you the details because it was exactly the same procedure as when I farmed chests with the Paladin. I couldn't find any meaningfully better gear compared to the Paladin either, so I settled for trying to get lucky with an inventory full of arrows, this time using a bow socketed with 3 chipped emeralds, as I had not been able to gamble a similar bow, but despite getting some good streaks in, with a 5% chance to hit and needing so many arrows to hit, I couldn't even get the Fallen down to half life. I wasn't necessarily expecting this to work, but I did expect to get closer than that. Maybe it was because I had built up a lot of expectations while grinding with the Amazon, but this setback hurt a lot more than the previous ones. At this point I was completely out of ideas. The Necromancer's level 1 skills don't do enough. The Druid has a level 1 poison skill but no way to get it without leveling up, as the lowest level Druid pelt has a minimum level requirement of 3. I actually abandoned this challenge for a while and focused on other projects, thinking it was simply not possible. But then, a few weeks later when playing another character, I had an idea while running through the jail. It involved some extremely difficult challenges, like making it through most of the act including the very narrow underground passage without taking a single hit. It seemed crazy even to me, but this small spark of an idea completely rekindled my determination for this challenge. Making it through the cold plains and the stony field was no problem, but the underground passage was basically a death run. If I were to have any chance I had to both play well and get lucky with monster spawns. I died tens of times attempting this, but then on one attempt the stars aligned perfectly, and I want to show you the entire run through, because I can still barely believe it myself. So yeah, that just happened, and I immediately opened the town portal when I emerged on the other side, both to be able to go back to town to calm my nerves a bit, but also to ensure that I would not have to go back through the underground passage ever again if I were to die now. The Dark Wood, Black Marsh, Outer Cloister and the Barracks were not a walk in the park by any means, but compared to the underground passage the room to maneuver was huge, and I kept running, with several deaths along the way, setting up new town portals as temporary checkpoints until I reached the jail. And this is where I had that idea on the other playthrough. The gargoyle traps that can spawn here are inanimate objects, so it doesn't make logical sense that they would be able to regenerate their health. And yes, trying to decipher game mechanics from over 20 years ago based on logic and reason is unreliable, but a quick test that I did seemed to support the idea. With careful movement and patience and some clever tactics, like pulling enemies away, taking a TP back to town and then walk back from the waypoint, I managed to isolate one of the traps. And it was working. The gargoyle trap did indeed not regenerate life at all. The feeling when I had this discovery was more euphoric than finding a high rune. I had finally found the key to the puzzle that I was looking for. A single gargoyle trap took over 2000 arrows and 20 minutes to wear down, which was pretty crazy, but it didn't matter because eventually I killed my first enemy. The level up icons, what a beautiful sight. Now it only got me to level 3, which seemed a little bit cheap for an enemy that was 78 levels higher than me, but there is a very big experience penalty when getting experience from monsters above your level for the first 25 or so levels. Now that I had a way of getting experience, I felt ready to start steamrolling the game, but level 3 wasn't that much of a power boost, at least least not for the Amazon, so I killed the same gargoyle trap another handful of times, and it's hard to make this grind justice since not much was happening, but already at level 3, one kill wasn't enough for even one additional level anymore, and with every kill taking thousands of arrows and 20 minutes of constant attacking. Yeah. But as long as I was able to isolate the trap, it was both safe and reliable, so I stuck with it until I reached level 6, because that's when I unlocked a new crucial skill, Poison Javelin. And with all of that free time, while mindlessly killing statues over and over, I had come up with the next step on my plan, as now I had a way to poison enemies reliably. A level 1 Poison Javelin was a slow killer, taking down a fallen in the Bloodmoor took several minutes, but it was a reliable and consistent way to stop monster regeneration and drain their health over time, and that was all I needed to progress further. It got a bit easier and faster to slay Fallen as I leveled up and increased the level of my Poison Javelin, but at the same time the required experience also increased with every level, and you can see in this clip just how little experience each Fallen gave me after a while. I spent the next few days grinding Fallen in the Bloodmoor and the Cold Plains. I didn't track the time, but I estimate that it took between 10 and 15 hours in total. This was definitely one of the weirdest grinds I have ever done in Diablo 2, or in any game at all actually. But my patience paid off and eventually I reached level 18, and that's when I unlocked my next important skill, Plague Javelin. The main differences between Plague Javelin and Poison Javelin was that Plague Javelin was a little bit easier to apply since it spreads a cloud on impact rather than a trail, and more importantly, the damage is dealt over a much shorter period of time, meaning higher damage per second, which led to much faster kills. As I hit level 25, my Plague Javelin was now strong enough to take down a Fallen in 2 to 3 hits, so I decided to move on past the Bloodmoor and the Cold Plains. I put Ral, Ort and Tal in a large shield to make the Ancient Pledge runeword for a big, much needed boost to my resistances. The rest of my gear was scraps from the farming session and some OK magic items that I bought from vendors in town. Level 25 was also a major milestone for another reason. At 25 and onward, the experience penalty for killing monsters at a higher level than you is greatly reduced, which meant that my level grinding would speed up significantly from here. I was just so happy to see my experience bar make noticeable jumps with every kill. As I was about to leave the Cold Plains for good, I found a green death mask. Talrash's helm has some pretty juicy stats, but I was not even halfway to meet the level requirement yet. Still, it was a cool find, and if nothing else, it would surely be useful on a mercenary later on. I reached the Catacombs level 4 at level 44. I had maxed out Plague Javelin by now and had just unlocked Valkyrie. At level 1 the Valkyrie wasn't able to tank much, but the decoy was surprisingly tanky, and it was nice to have a couple of minions to draw enemy attention while I poisoned them, so I didn't have to keep running away constantly in every battle. And I'm really not sure what the decoy was made of, because he was able to tank even Andariel. I might need to do some reading up on how the decoy skill really works, because a level 1 decoy summoned by a level 44 Amazon being able to face tank Hell Andariel made no sense to me at all. But I was certainly not complaining, because it kept Andariel busy for the entire fight, and despite poison not being the best element against Andariel thanks to her resistances, with enough time I was able to drain her health down to 0 and completed the first act. Now this character was really starting to pop off. Oh, how far she had come since entering the Bloodmoor at level 1. Since Andariel was so manageable, I decided to try and repeat her a few times with the hopes of finding some good gear upgrades. On my way down through the catacombs, I found a unique full plate mail. Goldskin has a nice boost to all resistances, but it required some additional strength. I wasn't sure if I wanted to commit to that, but luckily I didn't have to decide because shortly after I found a Shale rune, which allowed me to make Peace, a rune word with +2 to all Amazon skills for a big damage boost, as well as a chance to cast a level 15 Valkyrie, which would be able to tank much better than my current one. Though with only a 2% chance to summon her on every successful hit, I didn't have too high hopes of that happening often. At this point I also gambled a nice rare amulet. If I was a druid I would have been ecstatic, but even as a non-druid I was really happy. A good boost to all resistances, half restoration and some magic find. And it was certainly superior to my current one, which I was honestly kind of surprised to find I was still wearing. And at some point between the end of Act 1 and early Act 2 I also made a lore helm for that extra skill point and some lightning resistance. I can't remember exactly when I made it, and it seems I forgot to record it. You'll just have to take my word for it that I found an Ort and a Sol rune after spending over 20 hours in Act 1. With those upgrades I continued through Act 2 with a new and improved playstyle of scouting ahead with decoy, and then throwing a Plague Javelin on top once enemies started to swarm it. Very effective. Well, at least compared to where this character was coming from. Poison damage has a bad reputation for being bad in Hell, but Plague Javelin deals so much raw damage that it was still quite effective. I mean 10k is a big number even if it's poison and even if it's dealt over 7 seconds. I did, however, start running into poison immune enemies in Act 2, and while I could run away from the ones I encountered in the desert, in the maggot lair I had to find a way to pass through them. I had my Valkyrie summon, and while she did deal some damage, that was not going to cut it, so I decided to try a mercenary. The Act 2 desert mercenary would not be able to stay alive in melee given he would only be level 53, so I opted for a rogue mercenary instead, and of course I chose Amplisa. I got her a random bow from Charcy, and while it was not a lot of damage, she was able to slowly take down the poison immune maggots in the lair with her cool skills. It was about time that I came up with a better solution to handle poison immune enemies, and from here on I began working toward Charge Strike as a secondary skill, but being only level 54 I would need a lot of additional levels before that became any good. But on the flip side, experience was still flowing at a good pace, so level ups were frequent. For the task at hand though, Amplisa and the Valkyrie had to do. I had decent luck with the map, so they didn't have to defeat too many maggots for me, and had snatched the Staff of Kings. Shortly after, however, I realized that I did not have the Horrodric Cube, since this character didn't play through Normal and Nightmare. I don't think I have ever had to get the cube in Hell before, but there's a first time for everything. The tombs were also a problem with the poison immune skeletons, and they were too many for my scrappy merc to handle. But with this character, I was not ashamed of running away from enemies while they were occupied by my decoy, so I managed to grab the cube as well. I still didn't understand how my decoy was so tanky, but she came in extremely helpful in the Claw Viper temple as I grabbed the amulet. I was relying heavily on the decoy to tank for me, but then all of a sudden it broke. When in the palace cellar, it kept getting one shot by skeleton mages. I had no idea what was going on with this skill. And by the way, I also found a bone snap, which was useless to me, but it's a cool weapon. And in the Arcane Sanctuary, decoy kept being one shot. I still had Valkyrie as a decent tanking buddy, but I was already missing my super tanky clone. But then in Telrash's tomb, it was invincible again. If you have any idea what the deal is with decoy, please feel free to tell me in the comments. But enough talk about decoy. In the tomb, I found my first Amazon-only javelin, which sounds kind of strange seeing I almost completed 2 full acts, but it was the first one that I noticed and picked up anyway. It rolled +2 skills, which was a decent upgrade even if the magic stats weren't that useful. I had put all of my recent skill points into Charge Strike, and while it wasn't amazing or anything, it was slowly becoming a serviceable secondary attack. And I could use it to take down the odd poison immune enemy now, as long as it wasn't anything too dangerous. I made it through the tomb and found Duriel. This was a scary fight because the area is so small, meaning kiting him would be difficult, and I would have to avoid his attacks because I couldn't tank much damage at all. Luckily for me, decoy seemed to be immortal again, so by recasting the decoy before it naturally expired, I could keep Duriel busy indefinitely, and by recasting the Plague Javelin whenever he stopped being green, I could slowly kill him. And I say slowly because, well, it was, but for a level 60 poison only character, it was not bad at all. Duriel dropped me some loot, but it was nothing useful, and then I moved on to Act 3. As I just said, I had reached level 60 at this point. My life pool was okay, but my resistances were not good at all, and while the Plague Javelin game plan still worked fine, enemies were starting to die slower, but they did eventually die because surprisingly this swamp didn't really contain many poison immune enemies, so I had a surprisingly pleasant adventure in the jungle, poisoning enemies, gaining a few levels, and making good progress. In the spider cavern there were some poison immune spiders, but my charge strike attack was doing a decent job against them. It wasn't the fastest killer, but it was enough to get the job done against a few green spiders. Sazak the Burning got turned into a different kind of green spider until it fell over, and soon I had secured the first of Kalim's organs. In the Flayer dungeon my decoy stopped working again, and that was bad timing because this place was really dangerous. Luckily I still had my Valkyrie, and while not immortal, could still tank well enough against small numbers of enemies, and decoy was still a good tool for scouting ahead. On my way through the dungeon I found a unique curious, Duriel's Shell, a great defensive armor and perhaps the key to finally being able to keep a melee mercenary alive. But I wanted to finish up some more questing first and reach level 66, so that I would be able to pair it with the Telrash's helm that I found in Act 1 to give him some lifesteal. We crawled through the rest of the dungeon and secured the second quest organ, and then while moving from the jungle towards Lower Kurast, I found an elite spear with 4 open sockets. Now unfortunately you can't make the insight rune word in a spear, but I did have an idea that could turn this into a nice damage stick. But let's talk about that once I hire a mercenary. In the sewers under Kurast I was for once blessed with a lucky level 2 spawn close to where I entered, and I quickly picked up the final piece of Kalim. Then I took on the High Council of Travancore, and to my surprise I was quite successful in doing so. Keeping them busy with my summons and poisoning them from a safe distance kept me out of range of their claws and their hydras. But then in the Durance of Hate I encountered another very annoying poison immune enemy, the dolls. They are fast, aggressive, and they explode if I would happen to kill one. So I instead tried to avoid them altogether, but just running through this place didn't seem like it was going to work either. Poisoning who I could, distracting those I couldn't with decoy, and running whenever I saw an open window allowed me to pass through the Durance of Hate. With some luck to be fair, but I'll take it. My decoy was an invaluable tool against both Andariel and Duriel, but against Mephisto it died instantly. Luckily, there is another invaluable tool built into the map of Torrents of Hate level 3. The small moat between the platforms made the primeval Mephisto look like an idiot, and several minutes later my poison brought him down. He dropped a unique Mighty Scepter, which is a very strong paladin weapon. Heaven's Light has skills, damage, sockets, crushing blow, and it sells for enough gold to buy a lot of potions. Act 4 was noticeably harder. Even though the Venom Lords are only immune to fire, they have a high poison resistance as well, and they deal a lot of damage. But efficiency was not really the main concern for this character, and I slowly grinded through the act. But I didn't have to suffer alone for too long, because soon I hit level 67, which meant that I was now high enough level to hire a level 66 mercenary. I hired one from Act 2 with a Holy Freeze aura for some additional crowd control. I equipped my new friend with the Duriel Shell and the Talrash's Helm. The 4-socketed man-catcher I picked up earlier unfortunately had way too high dexterity requirement for him at level 66 though, so that didn't pan out as I had hoped. Instead, I gambled a random polearm for him as a placeholder, and despite the damage not looking too spectacular, at least his defensive stats looked good. But in the end, the cool gear I had found for him didn't end up mattering too much, as he wasn't able to stay alive at all, even when fighting just a few regular enemies. I guess the level difference was just too big, so it was looking like I was going to have to stick this out alone after all. But while it was a setback to not get the extra tank I was looking forward to, it was not like I was stuck or anything. Isuel, who is a big tank, fell rather quickly compared to some of my other challenge runs, and I guess I can't claim to have done this completely alone, as I still had my decoy and my Valkyrie, which I would not have been able to do without. I found a lump from the Hellforge, couldn't think of anything to do with it, and then moved on to the Chaos Sanctuary. And while I have a lot of respect for how difficult this place can be, it was actually quite manageable. I took some potshots with my charge strike where I could, so that I would feel more directly involved in combat, but for the most part it was the same strategy that I had been using for most of Hell. Poison enemies, stay out of danger, and let the minions keep them distracted as much as possible. My fickle decoy stopped working again when I was about to take on the Seal Guardians, which had me worried for a second, but once I had made it to the middle of the sanctuary I had plenty of room to kite enemies. And to be honest, these plain old boots with nothing but faster run speed was perhaps one of my better items on my entire character, as they allowed me to create that little bit of distance to throw a javelin without enemies catching up to me. Against Diablo I went in close to avoid his lightning attack, but my defensive stats were so weak that his fire and even his punches were just too much for me to handle. But on the other hand, my poison did surprisingly well against him, so with just a little bit of dodging and running I was able to take Diablo down. He dropped some interesting loot, and the shield that it dropped was the Ward, a solid shield which was an ever so slight upgrade for me, and once I would be able to put a gem into it, it would be even better. The green set helm wasn't anything worth keeping though. And with that I went on to the final act, and after beating Act 4 I did have high confidence in this character. The areas of Act 5 are for the most part wide open, which allowed me a lot of room to move around, and I didn't run into too many immune monsters. I did go to Larsuk as soon as I finished the quest to punch a hole in my shield. I added a perfect diamond to the hole for an additional boost to my resistances. I made it through the act without many issues, and I found a decent unique mercenary weapon along the way. The Meat Scraper has decent damage, good leech, and 50% chance to cause open wounds. If only I could have kept my mercenary alive, this would have been a good weapon for him against the challenges at the end of the act. I fought the Ancients, and the first time Talik the Whirlwind Barbarian spawned extra fast and with mana burn, and it drained me very fast. I got them all below half health, but then I started running out of potions, and they got me. On the next attempt they didn't spawn extra fast, so I could easily kite them around the summit while the poison drained them, and shortly after I defeated them and proceeded into the Wallstone Keep. The throne room waves were a bit annoying since the main boss of wave 2 as well as all of wave 4 are poison immune, but by this point my charge strike was maxed out and strong enough to take down any poison immune enemy as long as I could create a little bit of space around me to attack without being overwhelmed. And the same with wave 5, who aren't poison immune but they have a really high poison resistance, even though I had to kite them all the way back to the entrance before I managed to separate them from each other. But eventually I took those down as well, and then it was just the big boss that stood between me and finishing the challenge. Bale. Bale, my old friend, you missed your chance to kill me while I was weaker. He was slow to wear down, but he really wasn't much of a challenge. I kept him poisoned constantly and stabbed him with my lightning in between. My defenses weren't great, but my life pool had become big enough that I could tank him fairly well. I required several trips back to town to restock on my potions, but with those potions and some patience, I was able to defeat Bale, and with that, this character had beaten hell after starting the difficulty at level 1. A big thank you to all channel members. Here's another Diablo 2 challenge video, and I'll see you next time. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel.